Hello, my name is Gar Sanders, and today I am going to be working over this Smith & Wesson Model 10-7 revolver in 38 Special. It's one of the most ubiquitous revolvers in the US in the 80s. A lot of police departments use this as their personal sidearm. And I picked this one up real cheap for $200 for my wife, and with the intention of training her to shoot pistols with this revolver. It's a good choice. The sights are very easy to see. It has the Smith & Wesson MMP style sights. It's this particular revolver has very little wear. It's got a very minor drag line, and from what I can tell, it has been fired once in its entire life. I got it for $200 because the double action on the revolver was no longer turning the cylinder upon trigger pull. After pulling it apart and cleaning it up, that was rectified, and the revolver now works and operates quite freely. Make sure it's unloaded. Double action turns the cylinder correctly. The timing is very good on it. Single action works well. The only problem that I have is that the trigger pull is too heavy for my wife to be able to effectively use it in double action mode, and that is what I want to have her practice with more than anything else. So I went ahead and picked up a few items that are hopefully going to rectify the situation for her. As it stands, the revolver came with checkered hardwood grips with the Smith & Wesson emblem in them, and although they're very nice, when my wife holds the revolver, her hand is too high up, and consequently the line of pull is in the wrong place. So in order to rectify that, I've picked up a set of Hogue monogrips for the Smith & Wesson K&L frame, square butt model. That's what this is. So that's going to shift the point of pull downwards and hopefully get her hand more in line with where the trigger is. Additionally, I've picked up a few other items that I think are going to be very nice. A company called Power Customs makes these beautiful little Allen screws. I'm going to move that up closer to the camera if I can. And I'm going to replace the slotted head screws with these on this revolver to make it easier to pull apart and put back together. Now, in my case, the slotted head screws in my firearm are perfect, and there's actually no reason to replace them. I just wanted to try these out and see how they worked. I have also purchased these two items for all of about $19. I have my purchasing here, and I'm probably going to scan this in for this part of the video so that it's easier to see. All told, the springs cost $18. I got two particular portions with it. This particular package contains 3 reduced power mainspring sets and a reduced power hammer spring. So I'm going to install all of these items today, and this is for Smith & Wesson K, L, and N frame revolvers. It's fairly universal. The spring pack comes with a number of reduced power springs, so you can choose the one that's most suitable for your application. In this case, I'm going to start with the lightest spring because it is for my wife and I'm trying to reduce the trigger pull. I also picked up the increased power cylinder stop spring. I think that's a nice thing to do, and I very much am a big fan of positive lockup on a revolver. So I'm also going to install that today. So that just about goes over what I've got, the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, and what I'm going to do. Now, the next very important part in all this is tooling. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over what I have and why I'm using it, and then we'll start disassembly. Okay, here we have the collection of tools that I will be using today for these operations. I have my Lyman punch and hammer set, and unfortunately the little plastic, the heads are all interchangeable. Whoops, a daisy. Excuse me. The heads on this hammer are interchangeable. It came with a brass head, a steel head, and a plastic head. Unfortunately, the first time I used it, I snapped off the threads on the plastic head. Consequently, I have now taped it to the steel head, so now I have some added mass and a nice soft surface that won't mar my firearms. It came with a full set of punches, of which I additionally picked up an extra punch and sanded down smaller. One of the older Smith & Wesson pistols I worked on had pinches, had a roll pin in it that was smaller than a 1/16 of an inch in diameter. So I put this on my lathe and turned it down until it was about halfway between 1/16 and 1/32, and that worked perfectly well for this instance. So overall I was actually pretty happy with the result on that. That went into my punch collection. This is for working on guns. It came with a brass drift. It has a bunch of different sizes, including a center punch marker. So that's a handy tool to have because we are going to be pressing out some roll pins today, and especially the plastic head is necessary on these Smith & Wesson revolvers in that you have to hammer the butt of the frame to get the frame plate to come loose. The next set, I have two sets of Grace hollow ground screwdrivers. These are American made, high quality tool steel that they've used for this, and every single one of them, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it very easily on this, and I'm probably going to take a picture a little bit later on. Every single one is hollow ground, so that instead of having two tapered edges which are consistently trying to cam out of a screw, the hollow grinding makes two flats there, so that when I put a torque on it, there's no tendency to try to push the screwdriver out of the screw and thus screw up my screw heads on my firearms. I have two sets of these screwdrivers. One is the pistol set, the other is the standard rifle set. I've had the rifle set for many, many years. It served me very well. The pistol set's a recent acquisition. It's very good. Grace stands by the quality of their tools. I actually managed to break one of the screwdrivers on a Smith & Wesson pistol that had never been pulled apart. It was a 1920s New Departure lemon squeezer revolver. And because I couldn't buy an individual screwdriver, I called Grace, and they sent me a new one, free of charge. I was expecting to buy a replacement, and they just mailed it to me, so I was very impressed with that. Very good quality set of tools. If you're doing a decent amount of work on firearms, you should have either the Grace set of hollow ground screwdrivers or one of the interchangeable bit sets. I personally prefer these, but to each their own. The last tool that I have is an RCBS trigger pull scale. I am trying to reduce the trigger pull on the revolver, so kind of in order to get an idea of where I am and where I went, I purchased this today for this very task, and I will actually be demonstrating it here very shortly. Okay, so here we are going to, before we get started, perform a little bit of trigger pull testing. Now, before I get started, I'm going to install a set of snap caps into the revolver, and this just softens the blow of the firing pin for dry firing events. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to see where we're at on the double action portion of the trigger pull. This is my RCBS trigger pull scale. This is fairly new to me, so just going to pull it up and see where it breaks. And as can be seen, it's off the accuracy portion of the scale, but if you were to extrapolate that out, you'd end up at around probably 9.5 pounds, which is quite a heavy trigger pull and more than likely the reason my wife is having trouble. However, we're going to pull 6 times to see where we're at and see where we can get an average for this. So once again, that looks like it was a little bit more, maybe more around 10 pounds. This was higher again. Same again. It's fairly consistently high. Of course, the accuracy of the spring up at that range is not very good. But the goal here is to lower the double action pull, hopefully significantly, and to also lighten the single action pull. Now if we go and start single action, okay, so that broke at 1 ounce under 4 pounds. So in this case that broke at 3 pounds 15 ounces. So we'll reset that and try again. That broke at 4 pounds 2 ounces. £4 pounds 8 ounces. Yeah, lady, hold on. That broke at 4 pounds 2 ounces. And 4 pounds 4 ounces. So we're breaking just over 4 pounds on average on single action. Now unfortunately none of the work I'm doing today is going to increase the consistency of the break, but it will lower the break weight. Okay, so the only thing that is going to rectify the poor trigger pull on this revolver, or the inconsistent trigger pull I should say, is a proper trigger job. Now that is beyond the scope of this current video and is something that I will make up at some point in the future. But for this job we're just going to be replacing springs. So the first step is to start pulling apart the revolver. And we're going to start by emptying the snap flaps and placing them back in their little speed loader. I like to use the HKS speed loaders for most of my revolvers. I find they're cheap and effective. So I purchased these and the speed loaders to go with them to train my wife on their use and get her familiar with the whole story. So we're going to start, pull this revolver apart. It's actually quite simple, but what we want to do is make sure as we go along that we are selecting the correct screwdrivers for the job. Now it is very easy to damage flat screws when removing them from firearms, and this doesn't matter which firearm. It could be any firearm. It's always a concern and a problem. Even with these screwdrivers, with their hollow ground capabilities, one still must be careful not to damage the screws. And it's a matter of selecting the correct screwdriver for the application. The screwdriver bit should fit tightly in the thickness dimension and as wide as you can fit without scratching the outside of the revolver. Now in this case I'm going to remove, actually I'm going to stop. I'm not going to remove the hammer spring screw just yet. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to remove the 3 side plate screws. And I'm going to use my Grace screwdriver P4 screwdriver. Now the older screwdriver set that I have does not have a numbering scheme on it, but the pistol set does. And they were specifically made up to work on most American-made pistols. And I find them to work extremely well. And it's important not to let the screwdriver slide in the screw and scratch the bluing on the way out. It's very important to keep the screwdriver centered and in the screw. The wonderful thing about these screwdrivers is they do not take a large amount of axial pressure force to keep them in place. Because they are hollow ground, you don't have to push in very hard, all you have to do is turn them. And I like that a lot. There's nothing I hate more than looking at a firearm and seeing mangled screws. So at this point, we have the side plate screws removed. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the side plate. So for that task, actually before we remove the side plate, I am going to remove the cylinder. Once this front side plate screw is removed, that same screw holds the cylinder yoke in place. So if I now open the cylinder and bring it forward, you can see that I can quite easily remove the yoke. And in this case, the cylinder can stay put and the yoke can be pretty simply removed. And I can remove now the entire assembly. So that does two things. It lightens up the revolver, and now when I smack the frame to remove the side plate, I won't have any problems. So these are the two portions. The company Power Customs that made up the little side plate screws also have shims that you can purchase to tighten up the end plate. But seeing as this revolver has had effectively no wear, that was unnecessary for this job. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to place it here. I'm going to grab another piece of towel paper as well to lay out all my parts. I keep my firearms very well oiled so that they do not rust in the safe. I do live in the South and it gets very humid. However, that has the effect of picking up any particulate that may be on the desk. So, the next step is to remove the side plate. Now, these Smith & Wesson revolvers all have the same design in that the frame must be impacted to remove the side plate, because the frame plate fits very, very tightly into the frame itself. Consequently, if you try to use a screwdriver to pry it off, you will bend the side plate and render the firearm useless. So this portion you have to be very careful, or you will effectively ruin your gun. Okay, so in order to remove the side plate, we're going to want to take our hammer with the plastic cap. What we're going to do is we're going to hold the frame stiffly by the barrel, and we're going to wrap the butt. And what that does is it twists the frame and it releases the side plate from its holding. And right now, if we smack this, we can see, I don't know how well, but we can see that the side plate is beginning to come free. It's fairly easy to do. You just have to make sure that you wrap it, fairly well, and the side plate will drop out. It's a pretty easy thing to do, and if you do it right, no harm can come to the firearm. It just has to be done right. Now, inside here we have the workings. Now we're going to replace 3 springs with this particular little job. We have the cylinder latch spring right here, and you can see the cylinder latch is currently in the up position. We have the main trigger return spring here. This is the most important on the Smith & Wesson revolvers, and we have the hammer spring here. We're going to replace both the hammer spring and the trigger spring with a reduced power spring from Wolf Springs, and we are going to replace the cylinder latch spring with an extra power spring from Wolf Springs, and that will hopefully reduce the trigger pull on the revolver, as well as make the lockup more reliable, which isn't a problem, but since I'm in here anyway pulling everything apart, I may as well replace it. So, we're going to put our hammer back, and at this point we are going to remove the mainspring screw, and we're just going to pull that all the way out because I don't like my fingers catching on it when I'm working on the gun. you just slide the spring out and make sure to unhook it from its little catch, and it just drops away. This is a formed flat leaf spring. It's nothing special. So we're going to be replacing that. I'm just going to set it over here for the moment. The next step is to remove the hammer. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm doing things out of sequence. The next step in this build is to remove this trigger spring housing. Now, this is the part where I have actually seen that there's this wonderful little tool that you can purchase to slide in there and get that spring out. Unfortunately, that tool is not within my possession. So I'm doing it a slightly different and frankly less desirable way. I simply use the smallest screwdriver that I have, and I push in to the spring and I lift it up to remove. Just like that. It's a fairly easy motion. No damage can come to the gun. And this way I remove my main trigger spring. And this is the biggest cause of the heavy trigger pull on this revolver. So this spring is going to be replaced with the lowest power spring in my spring pack. Now, since this isn't the only spring I'm replacing here, I'm going to have to carry on with this assembly. In order to remove the hammer, you need to pull the cylinder release latch backwards. This is spring loaded to be in the forward position and is only pushed backwards by the spring in the front of the revolver here. This spring at the front that holds the cylinder pin in place is a stronger spring than the spring here. So when the cylinder is not in place, this is in the forward position. This is also an added safety feature on these revolvers in that when it's in the forward position, it creates an interlock back here and the hammer cannot be pulled back, meaning that while your cylinder is open, you can never accidentally have the firearm cocked. So in order to get the hammer out, we need to push this back and rotate the hammer backwards. Now once we get to a certain point, right here, at about the halfway position, we will simply be able to lift the hammer out. Like so. We're going to set that over here. We're going to move these things as well. Both the side plate and the little interlock catch. So now we're down to just having the trigger present. And this is fairly easy to remove. All we do is we pull the hand back a little bit and then we slide the trigger up and out. Now in this case I am not going to remove the hand. The hand on these revolvers the handspring can break and that can need replacement, but in this case there are no problems there. So we're simply going to remove the trigger assembly and set it aside over here. And now we are down to simply removing the cylinder latch, which is quite frankly not nearly as pleasant. So I'm going to use my fingernail to depress the cylinder latch all the way through the frame, and then I'm going to pull it up, and with that it's going to bring the spring with it in its entirety. Now you want to be careful with this, obviously. Even if you're replacing springs, I don't like to lose the originals, and they will stay with the gun in its case for the duration. In this case the spring seems to be catching on the frame on its way up, but just pull that out and remove it. So now the trigger group on the firearm is completely disassembled. I have my cylinder spring right here. It's quite small, nothing to write home about. I have my cylinder stop, which on this firearm is in very good condition. And I'm at this point now ready to break open my spring pack and start replacing springs. So I am going to grab first my Wolf cylinder stop spring. I'm going to open it up. Now, these Wolf Springs comes with a pretty hefty warning. Obviously, in this day and age, with the number of idiots about, that's one of the things that these companies have to do. There is an installation procedure here. Now, they generally state that the installation thereof will void the warranty, so one must be aware of that and be cautious with it. In my case, I bought the firearm used, which means it came with no warranty. The instructions are fairly easy. They mostly go on about keeping the firearm unloaded, and only a competent gunsmith should do the installation. They do that for liability reasons, and a fella can't blame them for that. So, I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to pull out our new cylinder stop spring. Now, I'm going to set these here, and I'm going to zoom in and attempt to catch the difference between the two so that everybody can see. So here we have the two cylinder stop springs. The one on the left is the new extra power Wolf Spring cylinder stop spring. The one on the right is the original Smith & Wesson cylinder stop spring. Now, two things of difference here. The Smith & Wesson spring has more winds and of smaller diameter wire. The Wolf Spring has fewer winds of thicker gauge wire. And that's going to increase the holding force on the cylinder stop spring fairly heavily, and it's going to prevent the revolver from unlocking during heavy shooting. Now, these Smith & Wesson revolvers are very well known, especially the Model 10, for being able to handle plus P loadings without much trouble. The plus P load was basically developed for the Smith & Wesson Model 10 for use by police departments and can handle it without a problem. The Smith & Wesson website specifically describes this, and although for training purposes I'm not going to have my wife shoot plus Ps a lot, I'm definitely going to do so. So, once you can see the difference in the springs, it's time to start slowly reassembling the firearm. So we're going to insert our new Wolf Spring, and just depressing it, one can tell that that's definitely substantially stiffer than the original Smith & Wesson spring. So, this is not going to increase the trigger pull and the action in any meaningful way, but it will most definitely create a more positive lockup. Now, these are always a little bit tricky to get back together. What I like to do is carefully depress the spring with the flat end of a screwdriver until I get it to start into the proper location. Now, I don't know if somebody makes a tool for this. That would be exceedingly nice. But just a little bit of patience here, and the installation is not difficult. Like I said, it just requires patience. go. Installed extra power cylinder stop spring. You can definitely tell upon just pressing the cylinder stop that there is indeed more resistance there. And like I said earlier, although it may not have been necessary, I'm in here anyway, I might as well replace it. We're just going to set that aside. And we are now going to reinstall the trigger and hand into the revolver. While I'm in here, I am going to put a drop of oil on everything as I go. It certainly doesn't hurt, and I very much like to have all my firearms operate as freely as possible. And that means keeping oil on all bearing and working surfaces, and with the added benefit that it won't rust, and like I said earlier, being in the humid south, that's a rather significant concern. So, we're just going to reinstall the trigger assembly in its location, and I must admit that these older Smith & Wesson revolvers are very well made. The fit and finish on them is good, and it generally makes this a rather easy job. So, we have that. We're going to put one drop oil on the working surfaces there. That's good. Excellent. Okay. So, the next job is going to be to add our reduced power mainspring. Now, in this case, Smith & Wesson actually calls these the rebound spring. I apologize for the incorrect terminology earlier. We're simply going to open this up. Now, Wolf has added a number of springs in this kit. This was, I believe, called, hold on a moment. This was called the Shooter's Pack Type 2. They have a couple of different types for different revolvers. And the Shooter's Pack Type 2 came with a reduced power ribbed mainspring for use. So we'll be installing that shortly. And it came with 3 reduced power rebound springs. So in this case, we're just going to go right ahead and we're going to install the lowest power provided, the 13-pound spring, and hopefully that will do what we want in getting the trigger pull reduced. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the two, but I'll take a close-up anyway. In this case, the Smith & Wesson spring is here on the right, and the Wolf power spring is here on the left. Now, the Wolf spring is both smaller in diameter and slightly shorter in length, and that is going to reduce the effective weight of the spring on the trigger group, and that is what we're looking for in this case. In this case, we want this spring and the hammer spring to be as light as possible. So we're going to go ahead and install this, and I have found a little trick to do so without the special tool. In general, I like to have the best tooling available and the right tool for the job. And I have that with my hollow ground screwdrivers. However, specialty tools such as this, that I would have very intermittent use for, is much more difficult to justify the purchase there. So, in this case, in order to install this, I've found that my Grace P2 screwdriver just fits slightly in the spring. Just enough that I'm going to be able to compress the spring into the trigger spring block, and yet I will be able to catch and remove the screwdriver upon compression. So we're going to go ahead and do that. as soon as we line up the little detent in the trigger with the ball, all I need to do is push in here after getting a decent grip on the revolver until it catches on the pin, and then push down. Simple as that. So, with that installed, I'm going to return the hammer to its proper place. Like so. And now we only have to install our mainspring. Now in this case the reduced power mainspring only comes in one weight. Once again, we'll give it a close-up. The original Smith & Wesson spring is on the right. The Wolf spring is on the left. The Wolf spring is a ribbed spring. The Smith & Wesson spring is not. The Smith & Wesson spring additionally is actually a forging with thickened features on each end, whereas the Wolf spring in this case is stamped. Now, whether that's better or not, well, it's hard to tell, to be honest with you. At this point, the whole idea is to reduce the power of the trigger pull, and if this does the job, then that's all I care about. Okay, so we're now going to take the trigger spring, and we're going to add some oil to it because it is in its current condition dry, and will thus be prone to some surface rust. So once we get some oil on that, you're ready to install it. I'm also going to put some oil on the little cam follower there, as well as the sear and working parts while I'm at it. Now installing the mainspring is actually quite an easy task, as easy as disassembling was. So simply pushing it up and catching it in the right position, and then installing the spring is just that easy. The spring is now in place, and all I need to do is put the tensioning screw back in. We're again carefully going to center our screwdriver in the screw. If you forget to center the screwdriver in the screw, you will mar the bluing as you're trying to install the screw. And unfortunately, this is one of the easiest things in the world to see. So, with that as it is, and my bluing in perfect condition, my pistol is ready to reassemble the side plate. So, as far as assembling goes, the side plate goes, it's a fairly easy job. I have found it to be, well, rather trouble-free, in all honesty. So, I'm going to go ahead and place the interlock safety at the bottom, and I'm going to carefully place the side plate in its position. Now, I should note that the side plate has a boss on it, right here. And you have to slide the side plate up and in at an angle. And then, if everything is in the right position, which in this case it's actually not quite. Try that again. It should simply pop into place. Oh. In this case I'm having a little bit of trouble with one of the interlock features. Almost, baby.
I don't need.
Where?
Switch to
Oh, you don't want to bring Jack and me? Oh, I didn't mean like that. Like 5 minutes? Okay, so here we go, fully installed after a little bit of struggle. The next thing that we're going to place in there is our Power Customs screws. Come with a nice little brochure of all of their other stuff. But here's what we're really looking for. And they have wonderfully provided a little Allen wrench with the set, which I frankly greatly appreciate. It saves me a walk outside the garage. Now, the back two screws on the Revolver are just retaining screws. The front screw on the revolver is also at doubles as the yoke retaining pin. Consequently, we will install the yoke before installing the front screw. Now when installing the yoke, you want to be careful to not screw up the bluing on the cylinder. And there we go. The yoke and the cylinder are installed. We are going to install our base pin screw. Just like that. We are going to make sure that they're tight. That's good. We're going to just check the action of the revolver is still fine, and it is. So, the next step is to install the Hogue grip. Hogue mono grips are installed with this little steel spring clip and the screw. We want to remove the screw. We want to carefully install the mono grip spring onto the revolver around the grip pin. It's fairly easy. You just have to pull the spring clip out in both directions and slide it on. Word of warning, it is fairly easy to scratch your bluing if you're in a hurry, so just take your time at it. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to slide that down in the grip, like so. And we're going to make sure that it's in the right place down in there, and we're going to slide it home. Install the screw. We're going to pick one of the wide screwdrivers for this task. We're going to adjust it just a little bit. We're going to bring the screw home. There we go. And that's done. All installed and ready to go. So the only thing left to do now is to reinstall the snap caps and test our trigger pull. So, after having checked with my wife, she has confirmed that the felt trigger pull on the revolver is significantly lower than it was before. And I am suspicious, actually, that the trigger pull gauge is woefully inaccurate above 8 pounds. And I say that because if I pull it out to 8 pounds, the spring is becoming overcompressed. So I don't think anything reading above the actual scale here is going to be in any way extrapolatable. So that part of the test, unfortunately, is not a good comparison. The single action pull, however, is an excellent comparison. And in this case, it is significantly lighter. And the felt trigger pull is also significantly lighter. Much easier to pull, and my wife has said that it's actually going to be relatively easy for her to shoot the revolver in this condition. So at this point, the gun is basically ready to head to the range. However, before putting it away, there's one last thing that I'm going to do, and that is put a nice layer of oil all over the finish to ensure that I don't get any rusting between now and the next time I shoot it. I'm also going to remove the snap caps from the firearm. And put those away as well. So overall, the work that has been done has been a rather considerably good success. And until I do my next firearm, that's about as much knowledge as I am going to impart at the moment. Thanks for watching. Bye.